gonna go ahead and call the meeting to order. It is 5:34. Are there any public comments? None? All right. Well, that brings us on to approval for previous minutes from regular board meetings of August 7th and November 6th.
Oh, we got enough to do on this.
We do have enough.
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
I have a
By
motion.
Aaron, second by Nathan.
Yes.
Nathan Turner,
Yes.
Anita Charlatan,
Yes.
Darrell Covington,
Yes.
and Aaron Rooney.
Yes.
All right. What? Not on? Oh, there we go. Okay. All right, those pass 4-0.
All right. Perfect. And then the minutes from November 6th. Everybody have an opportunity to review the November 6th minutes. It was a really long meeting.
I would like to break that. Dan, we can do it. We can do it. 5:30 and end at 5:30.
I think we
We
could.
were really close.
If everybody's in on it,
Yes,
and everyone's studied, and they can just, everyone vote immediately.
it's possible. I think you're right.
All right, can I get a motion to approve the minutes from November 6th?
I wasn't here, so.
I know.
I'll move.
Okay, I have a
Valerie.
motion to approve the minutes from November 6th for Valerie Duncan. Can I have a second, please?
Second?
I have a
Second, Anita.
second from
All
Anita.
right.
Yep.
Nathan Turner,
Yes.
Anita Charlatan,
Yes.
Valerie Duncan,
Yes.
Darrell Covington,
Yes.
and Maneka Gibbs.
Yes.
All right.
All right, that brings us on to number 4, HPC application number 23-20, discussion and potential action or request for certificate of compliance for the new Fry Design Co. projecting sign for building located at 108 South Division. Staff report?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As indicated, this is a request for a new projecting sign. They're requesting a 3x5 sign. It would be on the very back edge or the south edge of the existing building. As I've mentioned a number of times, when the design guidelines were done, it was, they didn't take into account multiple unit buildings in that. So projecting signs by the guidelines should be on the storefront side. Obviously, his business is on the side, so that isn't reality in that. So the location in that, staff doesn't have any problem with it. The only thing I wanted to mention, and the applicant can talk to this, is the guidelines do say it should only be 4 feet from the, basically 4 feet wide or 4 feet from the building, and they're proposing 5 foot. Part of that might have been they were going off of the gosh darn it, the boomerang, yes, thank you, boomerang, which honestly, I don't know how that ever got approved, but that was before me. So anyway, staff had just suggested either just make it 4 foot or make it a 3x5, so it goes out by 3 and down by 5. Or if you guys want to approve it to be compatible with the other, I was just making mention of that, so. Other than that, there really wasn't any issue with it. I think the design fits in and the bracket fits in well too, so.
Okay, the applicant present?
Yes, he is.
You want to come up, please? And I'm assuming you're Mr. Fry?
I am.
Wonderful. Okay, so this is going to be facing Oklahoma, correct? And the stairs would, to
No,
your
Division.
business, or sorry,
Actually, perpendicular to Division.
okay,
It's in line with all the other signs in the building.
okay,
So there's 3 other signs, 2 others.
Two others, yeah.
Two other signs.
On the building
Right.
face like this.
okay,
And so it's projecting in exactly the same proportion and distance or location as the others.
okay. And it would be on the corner, right?
Yeah, literally right on that
Right there on
corner
the
edge,
corner.
right there by
Where
the alley.
boomerangs should be,
Theirs should be on the front.
On the
Yeah,
front,
that should,
yes.
theirs should, because they're the primary business there.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Boomerang should be on the very far side.
on the very far
yeah.
side of it, yes.
Yeah.
And they took that empty sign arm that was there for the longest time.
Okay, that's probably why it
And
was
then
there.
Century 21 has the one that you're seeing in the far render.
Right.
And then ours, really, the only logical place is on the end, on that pilaster on the end. Sure.
Okay,
So it looks really uniform.
Well, that's my intent, yes,
Yeah,
ma'am.
yeah.
yes. I mean, even though it doesn't quite fit, as long as it's uniform with the others, I think I'd go with the exception to the rule, as long as it all matches.
Yeah. You don't want it,
You don't want it
Not
to
to
be
look
smaller
different.
than the rest that's right
Right,
there. Yeah.
mhm.
You guys have any other questions on the signage?
Will there be any potential for lighting it?
For lighting it? Oh, I'd love to light it.
Just curious if,
The code doesn't allow illuminated signs.
or shining. light.
Yeah, they could shine light on it, but can't illuminate it.
Yeah, exactly, yes.
yes.
Yeah. Just curious.
I like it.
Just want to acknowledge these renderings. That is some old school skill. That is very cool.
We
Yeah.
try.
Yes. I said the same thing when they came in. I believe it was one of his interns that did it.
It actually was.
Yeah,
Heck, yeah.
I told her the same thing, that I was very impressed. I was like, holy moly.
Love it. That's what we need.
Well, I think it looks great. Is there any other questions? No? All right,
I'll make a motion to approve.
all right. I have a motion by Nathan,
And second,
a second from
Second by,
Danita. Anita?
oh, Anita, okay. Nathan Turner,
Yes.
Anita Charlatan,
yes.
Valerie Duncan,
Yes.
Darrell Covington,
Yes.
Aaron Rooney,
Yes.
and Maneka Gibbs.
Yes.
All right, 6-0.
Good to
Thank you
go.
all.
Welcome.
Thank you very much.
All right, that brings us to item number 5, HPC application number 23-021. Discussion and potential request for certificate of compliance for a new IPIN framed projecting sign and window signage for a building located at 109 North Division. Staff report?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As indicated, this is for I've Been Framed. They're moving from their current location over there on Oklahoma to this unit on Division. They're looking to have a 2x3, basically 6-foot sign, or 6 square foot sign. And height, if you remember the building to the south that has almost like a entrance area there, there's 2 units. She's gonna hang it literally under that area there right by the door. So it won't actually be projecting per se, it'll be just hanging from the area as you walk in. Similar to like terracotta where it's under the canopy type thing. And then also was looking for approval for the window signage. It would be the same as the projecting sign. It would just be the white lettering that says I've been framed, custom picture framing. And it wouldn't exceed a third of the window. That I'll give it back to the commission. The applicant is not here, so.
Yeah, I didn't see Regina.
No.
I did notice that this is illuminated.
Oh, I'm sorry, I should have mentioned, I forgot to mention that in there. She did indicate the lights are not part of it. She was just using that as an example, because that was the one she had inside. And so she's gonna move it outside, but there won't be lights.
Okay. Any other discussion, commissioners? Questions?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay,
All right, motion by Nathan.
Somebody's gotta do it.
I'll second.
Oh, second by Rooney. All right. Nathan Turner
Yes.
and Anita Charlatan,
Yes.
Valerie Duncan,
Yes.
Darrell Covington,
Yes.
Aaron Rooney,
Yes.
and Maneka Gibbs.
yes.
All right, 6-0.
Moving right along. All right, number 6 is discussion and potential action on request for certificate of compliance for the placement of trees along Wentz Street between East Oklahoma and East Harrison and along East Harrison Avenue by the city parking lot. Staff report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As indicated, this is to get approval for placement of trees. I think most everybody's familiar with this area. It's where Red Brick Nights, along Wentz there, the East Oklahoma, Wentz intersection, and even by Harrison. We were approached by Joe Chappell, as well as, I think he's got a couple other people working with him. He's here, he can talk on that. But they were looking to donate the trees, and so we were very happy about that. And so the city agreed that we would essentially dig the holes and they would plant the trees. It's probably gonna be like a springtime planting, if approved. And again, the map shows generally where we're looking to place the trees. Depending on utility locations, property lines, that type of thing, they may move slightly, but in general, they're going to be where they are. The proposed tree is the Princeton elm. There's some pictures of it. It is a tree that is historic to Guthrie. We have them all around. We even have some downtown by the Victor Building there, that parking lot. Those are Princeton elm. I provided some information about the tree species itself, but it is a good tree to have downtown area because it provides shade, but not a lot of leaves or doesn't make a lot of mess, basically. And then, what was the other thing I was going to say? Oh, and I think there's somebody, yeah, the Harrison Street I think that's over by Vision Source is one of them, and then I think on our other parking lot. But anyway, he also worked with Joe Coffin on getting the proper species, and this was also recommended by him because not only the historic, but it also has, if you want to say, good resiliency for the area. So with that, I'll give it back to the commission. Again, Joe's here if you have any questions of him.
Okay. Mr. Chappell, you want to step up, please? I love trees, so I'm down.
Yes, it's much needed in that area.
So you plan on putting these in the easement?
Please state your name.
Yes, yes.
Joe
Yes.
Apple, 519 North Park. Oh, you don't have to give your address anymore, do you?
Because real quick, just to answer Maneka's question, because she asked if they're going to be in the easement, and yes, they'll be in the parking lot in the easement, so it'll be all on public property.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yep, that's,
Just a little bit of information on this. You know, I've worked with Neighborhood Solutions, which, if, for those of you that are not aware, you know, Neighborhood Solutions was instrumental in helping all kinds of, mostly senior citizens of Guthrie paint their homes, depending on income level. But, you know, providing services to people in our community that need help. Now, of course, very involved with Hope House, but also was involved with getting the flags up and down South Division. All of those flags were paid for, you know, raising money from people throughout the community. Neighborhood Solution is also the sponsor for this as well, so that if people donate to the cost of the trees, that it'll be a tax write-off. Because one of Neighborhood Solutions' goals is to provide neighborhoods that are attractive and lovely and make Guthrie a better community. I did, Joe Coffin, who designed the Apothecary Garden across the street here and Honor Park. He came up and looked at the area and sort of suggested the placement of this and also suggested the Princeton elm trees. I did want to, and I know you guys, of course, have seen this, but knowing me like a lot of you do, you know I like pictures. But this is sort of the area, and, you know, of course, there were a lot of great buildings in this area years
Yes,
ago, the
there was.
Ion Hotel and Bath House, and there was a theater, and some were lost, of course, you know, we lost the Fiddle Shop to the fire, and that whole area just looks like a bomb went off in it. And it is a place where, you know, so many people that visit Guthrie are coming to the football games, and they walk out. We just want to make an attractive, you know, a place setting or a gathering place where someday where those trees are big enough that people can take their shade and sit under benches. Won't be a park. There will still be parking, but we just want to make a aesthetically challenged part of Guthrie just a nicer, more attractive place. So that was the goal. And I do know that several years ago, and when Mumford and Son were here, the University of Oklahoma did surveys from all the guests that we had in town, and there were literally thousands. And I know that it was really, really hot that weekend, but one of the things they talked about that downtown Guthrie needed was shade areas. And this is a place that we can put trees that doesn't interfere with the buildings or I know that a lot of people that have buildings downtown don't necessarily want trees out front because birds and all that, but this was an area that we thought might be helped. So if you've got any more questions, that's pretty much it.
Joe, the Princeton elm, compare it to some other tree for me, like the lace bark elm or the Liberty elm.
And I didn't know this, of course, because I talked to Joe Coffin. Lace bark elms, and you will notice that with the ice storms that we're having, lace bark elms are more susceptible to damage. You know, there's lace bark elms in front of like the Presbyterian church, and it just stripped the leaf. This particular elm, I guess, is more resistant to that kind of damage. It's also resistant to the Dutch elm disease. I'm way more knowledgeable.
I don't know exactly, the Liberty elm, I think it was developed in Tulsa, but we planted those at the Drummond home in Osage County, and they did really well.
I think Joe just, and I had, you know, I just listened to him because the landscape architect.
I mean, it looks,
He liked the fact that these
the foliage
grow,
looks a lot like the lace bark.
yeah, these grow, they
that.
grow tall and relatively fast and provide a nice canopy, apparently, so. I did, what kind of elm? I didn't even,
There's some that were developed for urban use to, you know, to be resistant against decay, bugs and all the elm blight and the different things that's a native elm. Or
well, and I
the-
think that's what this Princeton elm
Yeah.
deal is. And I think too, just because Guthrie has, you know, we have that parking lot south of the Victor Mall that has them there. I don't think the ones that we will put in will be as large. Those were huge trees when they were put in. I don't know if you guys remember that. They were like 16 or 17 feet tall, but we're talking about substantial sized trees. And I think the cost that we've had for them is like $450 a tree. So it's not gonna be
Right.
you know, it's not gonna be the kind of tree that kids could run over on their bicycles and run it, so, anyway. That's it. Anything else?
I don't have anything else. I like
Thank you
them.
all.
I'm glad they didn't pick.
I
the
like it
Bradford
better
pear.
over there than out here. I don't know why.
Thank you. All right, can I get a motion to approve?
I
the trees?
approve that I move that we approve the request for a certificate of compliance. I'll second it.
Second by Anita, all right. Nathan Turner,
Yes.
Anita Charlatan,
Yes?
Valerie Duncan,
Yes.
Darrell Covington,
Yes.
Aaron Rooney,
Yes.
and Maneka Gibbs.
Yes.
All right, 6-0.
Nice trees.
All right, that brings us to item number 7. That's the National Register nomination training presented by Matt Pierce with the National Register of Historic Places Coordinator with the State Historic Preservation Office.
Yep, at this
All
point,
right.
we'll let Matt take
Welcome.
it.
All right. See if you switch.
Say, hopefully the technology, oh,
That's
there
my
we
cue.
go.
There we go.
All right.
Love it how a plan comes together. So yes, so my name is.
Oh, no, it went.
Oh, there we go, perfect, okay. So yes, my name is Matt Pierce, I'm the National Register Coordinator at the Oklahoma State Historic Preservation Office. Our office is in the History Center down in Oklahoma City, just a short drive away. Guthrie being a participant in the Certified Local Government Program, one thing that our office tries to do is send our staff out regularly to give trainings on a variety of programs. So I know Sarah Warnicke's been up here in the past to give presentation on the tax credit program. I've been with the SHPO since September of 2021. So when we were thinking about possible trainings for 2023, we thought, well, hey, let's get my face in front of the Historic Preservation Commissions and talk about National Register. And so that is the whole purpose of this presentation. Typically, hopefully I can get you out of here as soon as I can, but I'll talk about some general questions that you might come across when you talk with folks about the National Register. Also, talk about the criteria for evaluation that we use to discuss to evaluate properties for the National Register, and the aspects of integrity. So with that, we'll start with some frequently asked questions. So one of the main questions I get is who can nominate a property to the National Register? And the answer is pretty simple, except under special circumstances. The SHPO is the only person with the authority to nominate properties to the National Register. There are a couple of caveats to this. One is if the property is located on tribal land, and if the tribal government has assumed SHPO responsibilities on tribal land under Section 101D2 of the National Historic Preservation Act, the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, or THPO, becomes the nominating authority for properties under the tribe's jurisdiction. So that's the one caveat. Second caveat is if the property is owned by a federal agency or a federal entity, say like a federal building, post office, that type of thing. In those cases, it's the federal agency's responsibility to nominate properties within its ownership to the National Register. And in those cases, sometimes we're consulted and sometimes we're not. So it just depends. But more often than not, our office is responsible for nominating properties to the National Register. So while we have the responsibility of nominating properties, anyone can prepare a National Register nomination for any property and submit it to our office for evaluation. We have a vast database on a wide range of properties in the National Register. So one thing I would always ask if someone's interested in preparing a nomination is to contact me to see if we already have documentation on that property. More often than not, we might. And so that gives us a good starting point to figure out whether or not we even think it's potentially eligible for the National Register. But essentially, once we receive a complete nomination, we will review and process it in accordance with National Park Service regulations and with the relevant standards and guidelines. And again, while anyone can prepare a nomination, we do encourage individuals who are preparing nominations to consult with property owners on the project and to work with them and our office to make sure that property owners have the most accurate information about the process and their rights in that process. Oftentimes I get phone calls from people thinking that I do your job, and that is not quite the case. So we just might make sure people have the most accurate information that they can. And the reason we do that is because property owners do have a right to object to the listing of their property in the National Register. How that process works is if it's a simple majority of private owners, so if we're looking at one building, one owner, if they object to it, or if we're looking at a district, and the majority of owners within the district object to the National Register, so long as they provide us a statement, to that effect, we will not list the property in the National Register. What happens in those cases is when we issue our notification out to property owners saying, hey, we are considering this nomination, and if we get enough people coming back saying, no, we do not want this property listed in the National Register, we continue with our review of the nomination. We end up submitting it to the National Park Service. However, in those cases, when we indicate that the majority of property owners have objected to the listing of that property in the National Register, the keeper of the register at NPS will issue a determination of eligibility rather than formally list the property. So how does the National Register nomination process work? Put simply, we review each nomination received. Any unacceptable or incomplete nominations are returned to the preparer with written comments. Usually, if it's a complete nomination packet, if it's prepared by a consultant, oftentimes those go through at least one round of revision. So essentially, they'll submit a draft nomination. I will review it, provide comments, send it back to them for revision, and then they submit to me a final draft of the nomination. One thing I tell people is if you're a property owner, you've hired a consultant to prepare the nomination, or you're a project coordinator, that sort of thing, you're paying the consultant to do the nomination, so they're responsible for making the revisions and doing that type of work. If it's an individual property owner, mom and pop type of situation where they're preparing the nomination on their own, I can be much more hands-on in helping property owners with the nomination, whether it's helping them with the statement of significance, the building description, preparing maps, taking photos, that type of thing. But if you've hired a consultant to do the work, you're paying that consultant to do the work, so you should expect them to be trained to do the work. Once the nomination is complete and in an acceptable format, the process is fairly straightforward. So if we had another property in Guthrie that was being nominated, the first step would be here. Once the nomination was complete, it would be sent to you all for your consideration. I would give a presentation, and then you'd have your opportunity to comment and provide your recommendation on whether you think the property should be listed in the National Register. If the property is within recognized reservation boundaries, we also consult with the TIPO, with the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. At that point, we also would then submit it to the State Historic Preservation Review Committee, which meets in Oklahoma City. They meet quarterly. They meet in January, April, July, and October. And so essentially here next month, we have a meeting coming up in January where we have 3 nominations being considered. Same thing, I give the presentations. They provide their comments and their feedback and their recommendations. I take those recommendations and their comments and ultimately submit the nominations to the keeper at the National Park Service in Washington, D.C. And at that point, the keeper has 45 working days from the date of receipt of the nomination to either list the property in the National Register, issue a determination of eligibility in those special circumstances, such as if the property owner objects to the nomination. They could reject the property for listing, or what happens periodically is they might return the nomination for additional information or clarification. The keeper notifies our office of listing the property, so each week I receive a list of all the properties throughout the United States that have been listed in the National Register that week. It is a wide variety of properties and resource types. And then for those properties that are in Oklahoma, once we receive notification that those properties have been listed, we send out notifications to property owners, to elected state and local officials, to the COG, that type of thing. So make sure everyone gets notified. Last couple of quick questions here that I commonly get. One, what the National Register of Historic Places does not do, and then the next one will be what the National Register actually does. So the National Register does not prevent demolition of the property, does not restrict the use of property, does not restrict the sale of private property, doesn't require continued maintenance of private property or require that any specific guidelines be followed in rehabilitation. It does not require an owner to give tours of the property or open it to the public or guarantee funds for restoration. It doesn't provide a tax credit for a private residential structure. Unfortunately, there are states out there that actually have tax credit programs for private residences, but Oklahoma is not one of those. And then the National Register does not automatically provide a historic marker for the property. Property owners do receive a certificate from our office that's signed, sealed, all that jazz, saying that the property is listed in the National Register, but plaques, signage, those types of things, those have to come from the property owner and not from our office or from Park Service. And then what the National Register does, it does 4 key things. First, it provides recognition of the property's significance in history, architecture, archaeology, or engineering. So it essentially says this place matters, and it is significant. Second, it can provide limited protection when a property is endangered by federal undertakings or what's called Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. So if there is a federal undertaking, it could be cell tower construction, bank moving into a new building, HUD project, wide range of undertakings. Our office reviews all those undertakings and to make sure that they're, to identify if there are historic properties in their project areas, and if so, how do we mitigate any potential effects that the project might have on those properties. Third, it can provide owners of income-producing properties the opportunity to receive investment tax credits for certified rehabilitation projects. This is our tax credit program. It's one of our most successful programs that we have. So if for owners of income-producing properties, that is it's meant to help defray the costs that are associated with rehabbing historic buildings. And then last, it can provide owners an opportunity to apply for matching grant and aid for restoration rehabilitation when such funding is available. And that last phrase is key: when such funding is available. There is no such funding available right now in terms of matching grant and aid projects. There are some grant programs, and if you get questions or comments from community members about, hey, I have this historic building, I'm looking for funding, I'm looking for ways to get my project going, send them to me, send them to our office. We are aware of projects through the National Park Service or programs through the National Park Service, through the National Trust for Historic Preservation. They do have some grant programs that are available to help with historic properties and for programming and that type of thing. And there are also several federal programs that you might not think affect historic properties or could help improve historic properties, but community development block grants, USDA rural development programs, a lot of local governments, private property owners and so forth can use those types of programs to help improve their historic properties. So with that, any questions so far? I like, so I'll keep going. I mean, I also very much understand that it is, 6:05 on a Monday night. So really quickly, what can be listed in the National Register, there are 5 different resource types that we use. And so buildings, structures, sites, objects, and districts, we have definitions for each of these. So buildings, these are the things that are designed to house people and their activities. They may represent distinctive design, so this is a picture of the First National Center in Oklahoma City, listed in 2016, and just recently a certified rehabilitation project, so they utilize tax credits to help bring this building back to life. It's a landmark in downtown Oklahoma City. If you're driving past downtown, they have it all lit up now, you can easily see it. But notable for its architectural design as an Art Deco style skyscraper, and then also notable for commerce because of its association with First National Bank in Oklahoma City. So they can represent these kind of grand, large skyscrapers that you see in Oklahoma City or Tulsa. But more often than not, they could be of vernacular design and of historical importance. Maybe it's because a significant event happened there, or an important person lived or worked in that building. Or maybe it could be, a building that's of a particular unique construction style or so forth that's particularly rare now. So it runs the gamut. It's not just these grand, large buildings that most people come to associate with the National Register. Structures are those things that are essentially designed for purposes other than containing people. So these are the purely functional resources in a lot of ways. Bridges, grain elevators, road beds, culverts, those types of things. This is the Bridgeport Bridge on Route 66 out in Caddo County. It's listed in part for its engineering significance. It's pretty notable for where it crosses the Canadian River and for those identical sets of camelback trusses. And it's also significant for its association with Route 66. It's on Route 66, a notable river crossing on Route 66. But yeah, bridges, road beds, grain elevators, those types of resources that are purely functional, but can also be significant. Sites, so think, natural landmarks or cemeteries or so forth, the locations of activities that are important in history, that possess archaeological value or historic cultural value. So archaeological sites are listed in the National Register. They're classified as a site. Or this photograph, this is of the Rock Mary, again out in Caddo County. Notable for it's a mound mound is not the right word, but a landmark of red sandstone. But it attained historic cultural value because immigrants and explorers who were crossing across Oklahoma, this was seen as a notable landmark on their journey westward. And so, if you look at travel diaries and historical accounts of some of the immigrants traveling across Oklahoma, they commented on this site. And it also attained its name because there was a particular dragoon expedition, and an officer proposed to a woman on the trail. He stood on top of the rock and proposed down to her, if I remember the story correctly. And so it attained cultural significance, and so listed for its cultural significance. Even though if you don't, even otherwise, if you're just looking at it, it just seems like it's a mound of red sandstone. But archaeological sites, Rock Mary, Antelope Hills is another, geographic landmark that's classified as a site and listed in the National Register. So there's that. Objects, these are primarily small in scale and often artistic, and they can be individually listed. So a couple of examples here. Another Oklahoma Historical Society site, the Pioneer Woman statue up in Ponca City, is individually listed in the National Register as a site or as an object for its artistic significance. And on the right is a Spirit of the American Doughboy statue. This is out in front of the Veterans Center, the Veterans Hospital in Muskogee, also individually listed as an object. So there's a couple of cases where we have, statues or fountains that might be individually listed. But more often than not, they might contribute to the character of a district or a particular property. So for instance, we recently just processed a nomination for a school out in Delaware County, where you had the school building was of course listed, as a building, but contributing to that property was a stone memorial that was erected for the local farmer who had donated the site. And shortly after the school's construction, he had passed away, so the community erected this little memorial and it became a fixture in the schoolyard. And so we included that memorial, that object, as part of the nomination for that particular school building. So more often than not, those are the types of cases when we list objects, but there are these cases where you have kind of these high styles of examples of statuary or so forth where they can be listed. Then last are districts, essentially any combination of resources united historically or aesthetically by plan or physical development. Think downtown Guthrie. These are contiguous areas. Sometimes we do have examples of discontiguous areas, but more often than not, these are contiguous areas made up of multiple resources, multiple buildings, sites, structures, objects. The key thing is that they're related in some way, whether it's, they share some type of context, residential, commercial, could be agricultural, could even be landscape design. Think like a city park, for instance. We would often list that as a district because you have a multiple collection of resources within a city park usually. So questions about that? Okay, so once we identify essentially what resource we're dealing with, we're working with a building, structure, a potential district. The first thing we need to establish is significance. Why does this place matter? What's the big deal? So there are 3 levels of significance that the National Register accounts for. First, there's the national level of significance, so those properties that are demonstrating significance within a national context. Statewide level of significance, are those properties that are significant within a statewide context, or the local level of significance, or those properties that are evaluated within the context of their local community. One of my main points that I repeatedly tell folks is that although it's the National Register of Historic Places, the majority of properties in Oklahoma are listed in the National Register at the local level of significance. So for instance, in Guthrie, we of course have, downtown Guthrie listed as a National Historic Landmark, nationally significant. But you also have the Excelsior Library that's listed at the local level of significance, or any other, of buildings and properties in Guthrie that can be listed at the local level of significance, because of course they tell those local stories, or they're indicative of maybe national trends or national events that happened at the local level. So essentially, within this level, so looking at national level significance, this is a photograph of Bizzell Library in Norman at the University of Oklahoma campus. Certainly, a distinct building, distinct architecturally. It is listed in the National Register at the national level of significance because of its association with the desegregation of college campuses across the United States. In this case, particularly with Ada Lois Sipwell Fisher. So it's listed at the national level of significance. So you have to have, these are these properties that demonstrate significance within a national context. So in other words, to make that case, the preparer had to assess what was going on at OU during the desegregation of college campuses. How did it compare with what was going on in other college campuses, and where did Bizzell Library fit within that mix? So you have to establish that national context. Statewide level, maybe. So essentially all National Historic Landmarks are nationally significant. So I mentioned downtown Guthrie earlier. The National Historic Landmark Program, those are for those properties that they receive the highest distinction within the National Register program. So they're National Register listed sites or properties, but they are essentially the cream of the crop. They are those properties that demonstrate, the best demonstrate national significance associated with events, person, trends, that sort of thing. So downtown Guthrie is listed as a National Historic Landmark. We currently have 22 properties in Oklahoma that have this distinction. The most recent one being the Honey Springs Battlefield out near Muskogee and Rentisville. It received National Historic Landmark status, I believe, in 2013, 2014. And it attained that status because it was the largest Civil War engagement in Indian Territory. So a really significant battle that occurred. Statewide level of significance are essentially those properties that are significant at a statewide level. Of course, I have a photograph of the state capitol. The state capitol, of course, is listed in the National Register. It was listed before the dome, but listed at the statewide level of significance because it is the state capitol building. Another building to the lower, I guess the lower right-hand corner It's now the Supreme Court Judicial Center, but was the Oklahoma Historical Society building. It's also listed in the National Register at the statewide level of significance. A couple of other buildings just off screen, the National Guard Armory and the State Highway Department Testing Laboratory, both of those are listed in the National Register at the statewide level of significance. So if it's a property that's associated with a statewide agency, or maybe it's the property, it was the building that was the headquarters for a state organization or something like that, those would be types of properties that we would look at in terms of a state context and see if we could establish that statewide context and see if we could list it at the statewide level of significance. But most of your properties, most properties that we see are listed at the, they're significant at the local level because they're reflective of those local trends, events, and so forth. So for instance, this is Hills Business College, or the Main Street Arcade in downtown Oklahoma City. Looks like, all towns have these types of buildings, these types of property types. This is looks like your typical commercial storefront. It's actually listed for its significance with education, however. It was the site, the headquarters for Hills Business College in downtown Oklahoma City from the 1920s through the early 1960s. So listed for its association with that college and its association with with job training and that sort of thing. And it was also listed in part because it was a tax credit project. And so this building, if you drive by this building today, you would see it's completely rehabilitated. There's shops and there's a bar at the corner there, and there's space up on the second floor as well. And so it's been a revitalized property in part because of the National Register program. So once we look at, are we talking about national level, statewide level, or local level of significance, we have 4 different criteria for evaluation that we utilize for National Register significance. A property can be significant for its association with events, or criterion A, its association with significant persons, criterion B, for its design characteristics, criterion C, or something that you all will not have to deal with as an HP commission, but that we deal with, criterion D, the ability to yield important information, either prehistoric or historic. So I'll briefly go into each of these in a little bit more detail. So under criterion A, these are the properties that are associated with events that have made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of our history. And this can be either a singular event, think like a battle or something that happened in at a specific time, or a continuum of events. Maybe it's something that how a commercial district evolved from 1910 to 1940, something like that. So either singular event or continuum of events. And we have a variety of examples of events that qualify under criterion A. What's listed here are some of our most common: commerce, education, agriculture, politics and government, ethnic heritage, social history. I was just in Tulsa last week to give a presentation for a property that has significance both for ethnic heritage and social history as for its association with the civil rights movement. Otherwise, it looks like just a typical craftsman bungalow house, but it was a site that was pretty significant in Tulsa's civil rights movement. So we're nominating it under criterion A. This is the Ponca City Coca-Cola bottling plant in Ponca City. It's listed under criterion A for its association with industry, for its association with the development of Ponca City's soft drink manufacturing industry. One of those, we think of Ponca City for its significance with industry, with oil, with agriculture, but this nomination would have made a good strong case for this particular building because, of course, the soft drink industry was one of those secondary industries that developed to support folks who were coming in for the oil industry or for farming and that type of thing. So it's listed, for its significance under criterion A for industry. Criterion B, properties that are associated with the lives of persons significant in our past. That does not mean, oh, George Washington slept here. That does not count. Or even in some cases, oh, such and such grew up here. That's a tough case. That's a tough case to make. For criterion B to work, the property has to reflect the category in which the person made significant contributions. So if it's a significant author or a recording artist, the property has to reflect that significance. It can't be just, oh yeah, he just passed by here on his way to do something else significant. It has to have that direct association. So for instance, this is the Marlin Mansion, again, up in Ponca City. It's also a National Historic Landmark, but of course there's an obvious direct tie to E.W. Marlin, the construction of his mansion, during the time when his oil business was at its height. And so there's that direct tie between the property and the person during that time when the individual was achieving their significance. So that's the case to make under criterion B. I would say, in my experience, this is oftentimes the hardest argument to make, is tying a property to a specific person. Criterion C, we go from the hardest, I think, to what's the most common argument that we see. And I think that's because in large part the National Register program is focused so much on physical characteristics of properties. And so criterion C was developed in a sense to deal with that. These are properties that embody the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction, or perhaps they represent the work of a master, or they perhaps possess high artistic values, or they represent a significant and distinguishable entity whose components lack individual distinction. I will translate these up. In simple terms, this is the criterion that refers to physical characteristics of the property. What does it look like? What was its design? What were the materials used? Who was the architect or the engineer associated with that property? Those are most of the time, those are the arguments that are used under criterion C. So distinctive characteristics of a type, that refers to the form, function, or use of a property. So I had the Bridgeport Bridge up earlier. This is the old Santa Fe Railroad Bridge near Gwinnett, listed under criterion C because it's a good example of this particular bridge type. And so for that reason, you can make that argument under criterion C. Characteristics of a period, that's often in reference to architectural style. So anything from colonial revival to modern movement. This is Temple Emmanuel in Ponca City, listed under criterion C because of its mid-century modern design. It's a really good example of a mid-century modern designed religious building in Ponca City. Characteristics of construction method, this is where, I mentioned buildings earlier, how you can either have those high style buildings or those properties that maybe represent more vernacular building traditions. On the left, this is the Beard Cabin out near Shawnee, one of the earliest houses constructed in Shawnee. So listed because for its construction as a log dwelling. On the right is the Schultz Neal Stone Barn near Red Rock in Noble County, the largest freestanding stone barn in the state, built in the early 1940s, and listed under criterion C. Because of its, it is the largest stone barn in the state. I think some of the same builders that constructed the barn had also built the Marlin Mansion, so reflective of those, building traditions using stone, to build, such a large agricultural building. Or we can use criterion C to acknowledge new technologies or materials that were coming into use in the 1940s, 50s, and as we get to the late 20th century. This is the Usher House in Cushing. This is an example of a Lustron house. The house is completely fabricated of metal. The Lustron Corporation was one of many corporations that came to rise after World War II to help try to meet the housing crisis. To help find housing for veterans and their families who were returning home from the war. And so it's a completely metal, prefabricated metal house. You could stick a magnet to almost anything in that house and it would stick. So it's listed under criterion C for its, so this nomination, for instance, provides good context on the Lustron Corporation, the floor plans that they used, and so forth, and listed under criterion C. Work of a master, these are properties that are listed because of their, they're associated with designers or craftsmen who were considered masters in their field. And so the key caveat here is that the person has to be recognized as a master craftsman, as a master architect. On the right is Price Tower out in Bartlesville, very notable as a skyscraper designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. On the left is Joyce House out near Snyder in Kiowa County. listed under criterion C for its association with Herb Green, who was a notable student of Bruce Goff. High artistic value, so these are properties that possess recognizable artistic value. They may be individually significant. So on the left, this is the Ed Galloway's Totem Pole Park in Rogers County. Great collection of folk art that's near Route 66. Or we do have cases where we have elements that are of high artistic value, but they're part of a larger entity such as a building. So on the right, these are stained glass windows within the Whitechapel of Song that's on the University of Central Oklahoma campus. What's interesting about these windows is that the windows were designed by students at UCO, and then the project architects incorporated the design of the stained glass windows into their design of the overall building. And so the building itself is listed under criterion C for its architectural significance, and then the nomination also calls out the stained glass windows specifically for their artistic significance. And then the last part of criterion C, the distinctive entity whose components lack individual distinction, that's the language that's essentially meant to refer to historic districts. So those collection of commercial buildings or residential buildings or any other types of resources that perhaps individually they can't convey architectural significance or commercial significance on their own, but collectively they tell that story. So this is downtown Ponca City. Guthrie Historic District is another example of that. Downtown Norman, any residential historic district. Those are you can list them under criterion C for that reason. We do consider districts as a single entity or property. So for instance, we have over 1,400 properties that are listed in the National Register, but when you break that down by resources, we have well over, I think, 9,000 that are listed in the National Register. So, and within a district, these are resources that generally are not individually eligible. This is a photograph from the Edwards Heights neighborhood in Oklahoma City. Just looking at the photograph, it looks like a typical post-World War II suburban neighborhood, but it is listed in the National Register as a historic district because of its association with Walter and Francis Edwards. They were one of the most notable African-American developers in Oklahoma City after World War II. This was a suburban neighborhood that was marketed and developed exclusively for African-Americans who were, again, had returned home from the war, who were working at Tinker Air Force Base, and were looking for a place to live. We do consider resources are considered contributing if they reflect the character of the district. So here we have a photograph of a residential property in the White City Historic District in Tulsa, notable for its collection of Tudor Revival style dwellings. And so here you see all the classic elements of the Tudor Revival style, in that particular house. Compare that to a house just down the street that's considered non-contributing to that district because it just does not reflect the character of that district. This was built after the period of significance. You can see it's a different style, it has different materials, that type of thing. So we would consider it non-contributing. So there's that. And then last, criterion D. Again, as a Historic Preservation Commission, you all really don't deal with archaeological sites all that much, but criterion D is really fascinating. So these are the properties that are listed because they either have yielded or that they may be likely to yield information important to prehistory or history. So these are properties that are significant because of because of the significance that they can convey for prehistory, Aboriginal historic archaeology, non-Aboriginal historic archaeology. And so, for instance, we have bison kill sites out in the Panhandle or out in western Oklahoma that are listed in the National Register that have, excavations occurred, and the evidence that was found at those sites, has uncovered really valuable information about how indigenous hunting groups, lived and hunted in western Oklahoma. And so, we have, prehistoric archaeological sites that are listed in the National Register. We also have historic archaeological sites that are listed. On the right is Rose Hill Plantation in Choctaw County, in far southeast Oklahoma. This Rose Hill Plantation was one of the plantations that was owned by Robert Jones. Jones was one of the wealthiest men and slaveholders in Choctaw Nation prior to the Civil War. The plantation house is no longer standing, But again, excavations have occurred at that site. They've located the foundations of the house, other outbuildings. Robert M. Jones and his immediate family are buried there as well. So it's a really, rich archaeological site that has yielded information important to history and is likely to yield more information important to history. So we can use these, we can use Criterion D for archaeological sites. We can use them for cemeteries. I'm currently evaluating a couple of cemetery nominations that are upcoming, where we very well may use Criterion D for justification of significance. We can also use Criterion D for buildings. This is the Vanderson Homestead in Beckham County. We can apply Criterion D for those buildings that, that might be able to tell us information that's not readily available through other sources. This is the Vanderson Homestead. It's an example of a prairie dugout that has that evolved and went through several editions over time. So the oldest edition is kind of out of the picture. It's kind of the far left of the image there, and then I think that was constructed in the 1880s. And then the gable edition that you see, towards the center of the photo, that was constructed in the early 1900s. And there were several other additions that were constructed during the interim. So it's a really good example of how, that type of, prairie dugout construction, how it evolved over time. And so, we didn't have, you don't have drawings. The settlers out there weren't utilizing, architects or engineers to do this. They were utilizing, their traditions, what they had on hand. And so, we thought it'd be Criterion D really applies in this case because of the potential, because this is such a rare resource type. We use Criterion D as a justification because, this can tell us a lot of information about, how prairie dugouts were constructed out in western Oklahoma during the, late territorial, early statehood periods. Questions about that? Here we go. Okay, please get it off of my mug. That's not good. So last part of this, I appreciate you all hanging with me here. So once we establish significance, the other half of the equation is integrity. So a property has to be able to convey its significance. That's what we mean by integrity. A property can be in poor condition. On the left is the Edwards Hardaway family cabin, the Edwards store. That's associated with the Butterfield Trail. It's in very poor condition, but you can see, underneath that aluminum siding is the original, log construction from the 1850s and the 1870s. If you had a chance to go up to it, you can still see the axe marks into the logs. The stone chimney in the foreground, built again, also erected in the 1850s. So although it's in poor condition, still conveys a high degree of integrity that can convey, when it was built, the materials that were used, and that sort of thing. On the right is a former jail that, we're currently doing a survey of 1- and 2-room jails throughout Oklahoma. And so our survey coordinator got this tip of this jail that, oh yes, there's this jail out in this one particular town. Turns out the jail building itself had been demolished, and some random landowner had taken the jail cells and moved them to his farm. And then the stones on top are from a WPA era bridge that was also demolished and put it on top of the jail cell for whatever reason. So a property that it could very well be significant, but because it's been moved from its original location, the settings changed immensely, the building itself is gone, it's a property that lacks integrity. So there are 7 aspects of integrity that we look at. And a property does not have to have every aspect of integrity, does not have to have high integrity in each of these categories, but it has to have enough integrity to convey significance. So we look at location, design, setting, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association. So in terms of location, some of the questions that we would ask is, has the property been moved from its historic or original location? Think of the importance of a railroad depot being located at its historic location, or the courthouse and the courthouse square. How central that location is to that building's ability to convey potential significance. And if a building has been moved, how does that affect its ability to convey its significance? terms of design, has the original appearance of the resource been altered? Of course, buildings change over time, to account for changing needs, to new trends, and that sort of thing. But do any alterations impact the original design intent? So this is the Cleveland County Courthouse. You can see the original building in the foreground, 1930s PWA era design construction, and then in the 1970s they constructed that monstrosity on the back. So just completely overwhelms the original building. Now we're making the case. Now we're at the time where that 1970s era addition is now reaching historic age, where we may need to reevaluate the building's significance. But if you're trying to make a case for the building's significance as a First Association, as a PWA era designed building, you really have a hard case to make for that particular building, because that addition just completely overwhelms the building's original design. In terms of setting, how has the setting of the property changed over time? This is a criteria that we utilize more often than not for districts, but it can come into play for some of our more rural properties. Think like a rural homestead that's been developed, maybe it's being encroached upon by suburban development, or that sort of thing. So do significant changes in setting affect a property's ability to convey its historic significance? In terms of districts, we would be looking at trees. We'd be looking at utility overlines, overhead, setbacks, alterations to driveways, curbs, sidewalks, that type of thing. Those would all be things that we would be looking at in terms of setting. Materials, of course, materials are one of the best ways that we can place a building in context, because that, of course, reflects, what was available at the time to the builders, to the craftsmen who were working on those buildings. So have inappropriate materials been added to the resource, and have enough of those materials been added in a way that can completely affect the building's ability to convey its significance. So if we have, in this case, a historic aged commercial building, but the original storefronts have been infilled with vinyl and new windows. The historic arched windows, while the historic arched window openings remain intact, the window sashes themselves have been replaced with non-compatible, look to be aluminum frame sashes. So at that point, we have quite a few alterations happening here in terms of materials. You also have what clearly was historically a stone building, and then brick has been applied to in front of some of the storefronts. In terms of workmanship, similar with design and materials. Those are that's how we help place buildings and structures in context. And so have of course alterations, additions, those types of things are going to happen. Buildings are going to need to be repaired, but do those changes match the historic fabric, or are they sympathetic to the historic workmanship, to that craftsmanship? And then all those aspects collectively can help convey feeling. In short, does the resource feel right? Is it in its historic setting? Is it in its historic location? Does it maintain most of its historic design? All of that helps convey that feeling of, is the building historic? If someone who was at the building at the period of significance, can they still recognize that property if they were transported today? They still think about that. So this is the Eastern Oklahoma Tuberculosis Sanatorium in near Tallahena. So think about it's set up on a hill outside of town. For instance, think about what the impact would be if a 350-foot tall cell tower is constructed in the background. It would certainly have an impact on its integrity. Wouldn't necessarily preclude it from being listed, but it would certainly have an impact, because especially that resource type, that was part of its design, was to be located in these types of areas to promote public health. And then association, that's really just like, is the resource associated with this historic past? So like if it's a historic school building, is it still used as a school building? Or if not, are those features and finishes that were typical with schools still there? This is the Nine Tribes Tower in Miami, Oklahoma. It's significant because it's the only high-rise public housing building in Miami. It was constructed to provide affordable housing for senior citizens. It was listed in 2021, and it was still used for that purpose. Really minimal changes over time. It's still utilized that in large part for senior citizen housing. That association has not been compromised. I'll leave you with a couple with one cautionary tale where, we utilized these aspects of integrity, and we were able to kind of prevent, a nomination from getting all the way to the National Park Service, but it did result in Ponca City spending money for a nomination that ultimately did not go anywhere. So this is the Constance Cleary House in Ponca City. It was first identified as being potentially significant for its architectural design in 2013 as part of a survey. The house was designed by a Tulsa architect. He was very well known in both Ponca City and in Tulsa for his contemporary style designs. The house was built in the early 1950s. It was built for the daughter of a Conoco oil exec because, of course, that's what you did in Ponca City back then. And so on the upper left is a photo that was taken during that 2013 survey or shortly thereafter. And a couple of the hallmarks, one of the main hallmarks of the contemporary style is that you really can't see the front entrance. And so here it's actually recessed, it's hidden behind the tall, that tall grass. That tall grass is actually, this kind of L is that it's facing towards the north. The entrance is kind of recessed back in there. We always did have questions about the garage. We were curious as to whether maybe it had been originally perhaps been a carport. But, with that photo and some information, Ponca City had approached us. They wanted to use some CLG funding to fund this nomination. And we said, yeah, okay, go ahead. And lo and behold, a nomination preparer got up there to take photographs. And this was this is not long after I was at the SHPO. And finds out that work is going on. And so in the lower right, you see, the entrance has been relocated. We also found out that the garage had been a later modification, had been constructed in the 80s or the early 1990s. And then on the south elevation, again, the 2013 photo before renovations happened is in the upper left, and then the renovated property is in the lower right. One other key hallmark of this architect's design palette was he utilized combinations of windows and panels for his fenestration. And so, it's difficult to see in the upper left-hand corner, but you have multiple window types. You have hung windows, and you have sliding windows, and then you have like a couple of colored plywood panels in there as well. During the renovation, when the nomination preparer got up there, the current owner had replaced nearly all of those openings with just very simple 1/1 vinyl frame sashes. And then on top of that, the preparer also found out that the interior of the house had also been completely gutted as well. And so when we're looking at making the case for the property's potential significance under criterion C for being representative of a particular style or period of construction, we're seeing we saw alterations to design, materials, workmanship, all of which were red flags. They were red flags to us. So essentially, they went ahead and submitted a draft nomination. We reviewed it, and then we kind of had a meeting with us, the preparer, and City of Ponca City, and we just said, hey, we would if this should move forward, we would be of the opinion that it's not eligible under criterion C, and the city agreed with us, and it stopped there. And we have it on file and that type of thing. But just to I use this as an example for these last 2 key points. Is that, one, not all 7 aspects of integrity need to be present so long as the overall sense of past time and place is evident. As those alterations show, that sense of past time and place was severely compromised. If you're making a case for 1950s contemporary style design and you have some of those alterations happen, that's going to be a very tough argument to make. And that leads to the second point, is that nominations need to include an analysis of integrity to assess how the property is able to convey significance. That might only be a paragraph or 2, but it essentially explains how the property conveys its significance. And it was through that analysis that the preparer was able to help us say, yeah, we don't think this is eligible, and here's why. And we were able to show that to Ponca City, and they're like, yeah, we agree. And so it went from that and just stayed there. So with that, Questions, comments, concerns? Yeah.
On the building that was historical and then it had the modern 70s light up against it, does it matter if it's just kind of annexed to it? Or, you know?
Yeah, again, buildings change over time. There's certain, additions to happen. So say if we're looking at, we're actually looking at this right now with a post-World War II neighborhood where, they're building homes as quickly as it can and they're as efficiently as it can. So they have, you're looking at maximum 800 square feet. And so of course, folks are going to start building on additions as they acquire wealth and that sort of thing. And, so long as like an addition doesn't completely overwhelm the building's design, and again, it also just depends on the case that you're making, perhaps the alteration itself has attained significance as well. And so that's another thing that you could consider. Especially we're seeing that with properties that are associated with urban renewal in some of our larger communities like Tulsa, Oklahoma City, where you had like this 1920s style skyscraper, and then in the 70s, rather than demolish it, a new architect went in there and did some new design and did some renovations to it, and it looks really nothing like it did in the 1920s, but maybe that 1970s renovation has attained significance in its own right as maybe a good example of, early adaptive reuse or something like that.
I see.
So it really just depends on the argument that you're trying to make.
So it seems like if the original building is 100% there and has been unaltered, but they just kind of went up next to it and, and stuck something next to it, it wouldn't. It wouldn't change.
And we could certainly even make the case where you have like a contributing. We have those cases where you have like a contributing building and a non-contributing outbuilding that was constructed later.
Right,
that's certainly the case. The main kind of rule of thumb is that you try to have more contributing resources than non-contributing resources.
Oh, okay.
That's the
I
main.
think of this like our courthouse annex across the street from the courthouse.
Yeah, or the
But it's
Carnegie Library.
attached.
Carnegie,
Yeah,
the
and the
territory.
Carnegie Library.
Yeah.
So in the case of a house, like if there's a historic house, but you upgrade the kitchen or change the inside, that doesn't change?
No.
Because you said that house had been totally gutted.
Yes,
So
that
what
house-
is the distinction there? How much can you do?
So in terms of like in that particular house in particular, it was also that there were some unique aspects within the interior that could have helped with convey its significance. There was like a circular fireplace, there was a few other things like that. And to our knowledge, all those things have been removed. And so, typically for interiors, we really only judge interiors, if they can help convey significance. So for your individual residential properties, more, and especially if we're looking at like a district, the interiors are gonna matter. But if you do have an individual building, think like a religious building, the sanctuary is gonna need to be part of that
Right.
conversation, because that's
Right.
gonna help convey its significance. But maybe a 1950s annex or education wing that's set off to the side, we need to acknowledge its presence, but it's not gonna change the conversation.
Okay, because, downtown, what's happening here is we have the historic district and people are starting to renovate, finally,
Yeah,
the apartments upstairs
yeah.
and
I
making them
mean,
useful.
And we've had this too with a project that I worked on in the private sector prior to coming to the SHPO. It was a mid-century office building that we converted to apartments. And the key thing was we still kind of had to keep the main circulation pattern that would have been there historically. Because of course, like the elevators were in the center of the building. And we had to maintain the fenestration on the outside. But other than that, especially on the interior, like your interior circulation is what we would classify as primary space. Everything else would be secondary space. So then we had much more flexibility in terms of how we designed the new apartments. And so that'd be the same thing on the second floor of a downtown commercial building. or maybe you'd have, you know, you would keep that main circulation that might be up there on the second floor, and maybe where the original door openings are, but then you tear down a wall that historically subdivided an office or two offices and make that into a larger unit. So for the corridor, it still looks like it's as it always did, but it's much more workable on the other side.
Well, Mr. Pierce, it seems that any chance that we can get, it's good for people to get onto the National Register. But I guess my question is regarding the tax credits, if that's okay.
Yeah.
At what point, say, one of these building owners is interested in going after these tax credits, when do they get involved with you? Is it during the spitballing?
As soon as possible.
As soon as possible.
Yes. Do not wait, and this is also for if they just want to get listed on the National Register as well. Do not wait until after their project is done.
Okay, so bother you even if they think they
Yes.
might be a nuisance?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And then I will say that we're, myself and then my colleague Sarah Wernicke oversees the tax credit program. We are available for site visits. So if it's a type of building where, in most like for downtown Guthrie, more often than not, they're going to be contributing to the district. And so we may not need to be on hand for that. But if you have a building that you're not sure is eligible, you're certainly welcome to contact us and we could schedule a site visit, or, you can submit photos. But yes, contact us as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions? No? Thank you, Dr. Pierce.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
That was interesting.
It was very interesting.
Thank you for coming.
All right. Staff comments?
I just want to thank Matt for coming.
Yes,
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah.
because when Sarah came a year or two ago, it was good information, and again, this was very good information, so always happy to have them come down and give us some training.
It's always, likewise, it's always good for us to see how you all, what you guys are doing.
All right. Commissioner comments? No?
Nope.
Nope.
No, just
Okay.
that. I was
Go
gonna
ahead.
say that downtown looked beautiful for the walks and the stores. Oh, it looked really beautiful, so, yeah, good things for Guthrie.
You have officially done decorating.
Annette
Everything.
did that all on her own, practically.
Everything. All right, well, that makes it 6:00.